Good afternoon, members of the media, members of the public joining us. This evening, we are pleased to have another government press conference where we continue to update you on the work being undertaken by the government. So we'll start in 5 minutes' time. This evening, we are joined by the Honorable Minister of Land and Legal Affairs, Honorable Minister Saddam Hosein, as well as the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Honorable Sean Sobers. So again, we ask you to stay tuned, and in 5 minutes' time, we will be joining you, where the government continues to account on our progress to serve the people of our country. Thank you very much. Again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, members of the public joining us. Welcome to our weekly government press conference. This is the second press conference. We held one on Sunday, and now we are here again because the government continues to account to you, the people of our country, on the great strides we are making to serve you, to secure our country, and to ensure the well-being of our people. Today, as I said before, we are joined by the Honorable Minister of Land and Legal Affairs, Honorable Saddam Hosein, and as well as the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Honorable Sean Sobers. So to start this evening off, I'd like to invite the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Minister Sean Sobers, MP for Tabaquite, to join us this evening.
Good afternoon, members of the media and the national viewing public. This afternoon, I am here to indicate to the national public that there will be a visit by a ministerial delegation from the United Arab Emirates over the period January 23rd to 26, 2026. I am pleased to announce that during that period, the government of Trinidad and Tobago will receive a high-level delegation from the United Arab Emirates, led by Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al-Kabi, Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates. This visit is in keeping with the government of Trinidad and Tobago's outreach and the Honorable Prime Minister's vision for Trinidad and Tobago to forge new relationships with countries throughout the world to advance this country's foreign policy and economic interests. Based upon that clarion call made by the Honorable Prime Minister, the United Arab Emirates and many of the other Gulf nations would have reached out to Trinidad and Tobago around the middle of last year. And we had a visit from the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the CARICOM region in and around August of last year. Members of the media may well recall that in September of 2025, the Honorable Prime Minister led this country's delegation to the 80th regular session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. On the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, the Prime Minister met with several world leaders, including Secretary of State of the United States of America, Marco Rubio, on the 30th of September 2025 in Washington, D.C. There were several bilateral meetings held between the Prime Minister and His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. There were bilateral meetings also held between the Honorable Prime Minister and His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Khaled Al-Hamed Al-Mubarak Al-Sabah, the Crown Prince of the State of Kuwait, and finally a bilateral meeting between the Honorable Prime Minister and His Royal Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates. During these meetings, the Honorable Prime Minister was able to develop new relationships and pique the interest of these countries in Trinidad and Tobago's economic development. Following the UNGA, the Minister of Public Administration and Artificial Intelligence visited the United Arab Emirates, specifically the Emirate of Dubai, in early November 2025, and held discussions with the government there to advance this country's digital transformation agenda. During the period November 24th to 27, the Honorable Minister Jillian John, Minister of Works and Infrastructure, the Honorable Mr. Saddam Hosein, Minister of Land and Legal Affairs, and Minister in the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, and also myself, visited the UAE. During the course of the mission, the delegation held meetings with several leading members of the UAE government, including His Royal Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and members of the private sector within the UAE. We also met with Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al-Kabi, Minister of State, His Excellency Syed bin Mubarak Al-Hajari, and His Excellency Thani Al-Zayudi, all being Ministers of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The delegation also met with His Excellency Badar Jafar, Special Envoy for Business and Philanthropy, and we had several meetings with the Abu Dhabi ports, meetings with Burjil Holdings, which deal with hospital development, and meeting with the Department of Economy and Tourism in Dubai. Some of the outcomes pursuant to that visit at the United Arab Emirates: there were several discussions and initiatives with respect to establishing a diplomatic mission within the UAE, support to Trinidad and Tobago for operating as a non-P5 member of the United Nations Security Council, cooperation in the oil and gas production sector, development of land and utilization strategies for investment, development of the Port of Spain, operationalization of the desalination plants, air connectivity between the Middle East and Trinidad and Tobago, development of a medical tourism industry, and technical support to the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to improve the ease of doing business. Given the success of that mission, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is therefore pleased that less than 2 months later, a high-level mission, which would be led by Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al-Kabi, Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the United Arab Emirates, and her delegation consisting of 9 other individuals, will visit Trinidad and Tobago. During that visit, the delegation will have extensive discussions with the Honorable Prime Minister, the Minister of Works and Infrastructure, the Minister of Land and Legal Affairs, the Minister of Public Administration, the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, and the Minister of Culture and Community Development. The delegation will also visit several sites in North, South, and Central Trinidad, identified in the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago's revitalization blueprint for foreign direct investment, including Invaders Bay, the Port of Point Lisas, the Couva Children's Hospital, just to name a few. On Sunday, the 25th of January 2026, the delegation will visit the beautiful island of Tobago as guest of the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly and visit several sites there identified equally for investments. Members of the media are asked to note that the United Arab Emirates is among the world's 10 largest oil producers and ranks in the top 10 globally of proven oil and natural gas reserves. Its economy is among the top 3 performers in the Gulf region. The Investment Corporation of Dubai and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, the investment arms of their respective emirates, are cumulatively responsible for US $1.5 trillion in assets, and therefore Trinidad and Tobago must continue to engage and continue to build its relationships with the UAE and the wider Gulf region. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is therefore pleased to announce this visit and intends to make it a successful one for the benefit of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much. I will take questions later on within the press conference.
Thank you very much, Minister Stewart. And it must be noted that Minister Stewart in decades has still in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs under the interim Prime Minister in the delivery ministry of this country. So thank you, Minister, for your very determined hard work. Now I'd like to invite the Minister of Land and Legal Affairs, Minister of the Ministry of Agriculture, Honorable Saddam Hosein, to join us this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. Good afternoon, everyone, members of the media, those who are joining us in person, live, and those who may be joining us virtually. This afternoon, it is my pleasure to report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago on some very good things that are happening in the government and also some of the findings in various departments of state. Firstly, I want to address something topical. I am informed that this morning the opposition, the PNM opposition, had a press conference. The MP for Malabar Mausika, the opposition leader, the MP for St. Anne's, and the former MP for San Fernando West, now opposition Senator Al-Rawi, outlining certain matters in relation to the government's legislative agenda and so on. Firstly, I want to tell the opposition leader that when it was time to speak, you said nothing. On Friday, we had an entire debate on the Special Operations Zones Bill, or ZOSO, as it's being called now. And the opposition leader did not take advantage of that opportunity to rise in the debate and make any contribution whatsoever. But this morning I'm told that she has a lot to say about the bill at a press conference. You see, we cannot take the opposition seriously when it comes to their approach in the parliament. Firstly, we brought bills to deal with road safety. They voted against it. We brought bills to deal with crime fighting. They voted against it. That is the AJIPA and the home invasion law. We brought legislation to help children under the Life Fund. We got no support from them. We brought bills to deal with the TTRA. Again, no support from them. But I'm told this morning that the opposition leader is advocating for cheaper alcohol and rum. The opposition leader needs to get serious about her position in the parliament. We are here dealing with saving lives on the nation's roads, saving children, protecting our citizens from the criminal elements, and all the opposition leader can talk about is cheaper rum. Cheaper rum. The rum talk must stop. The bill that we brought in Parliament that deals with the special operations and the zones, that bill, if you look at it and examine it, it's currently being deliberated in the Senate, the upper house. It has both a soft approach and it has a hard approach also in terms of the various measures that we're giving law enforcement. But one of the pieces of legislation that we have passed, and I mentioned that we got no assistance from the opposition with, is the Home Invasion, Self-Defense and Defense of Property Act 2025, Act 11 of 2025. And I'm happy to report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the President, Her Excellency, would have given the proclamation for that piece of law. And that piece of law now is in fact proclaimed and is in effect. It came in effect on the 20th of January 2026 under the hand and the seal of the President. All sections, according to the proclamation, would have come into operations on the 20th of January 2026. So the government is working hard. We're working assiduously to help the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This morning I had the pleasure, under my ministry, together with the Board of CARICOM 1975 Limited and the Estate Management Business Development Company, the EMBDC, to have distributed 250 leases, residential leases, to ex-CARICOM workers, and that site being the Exchange 2 site in Couva. After 22 years of waiting for this promise made by a previous PNM government, a UNC administration in opposition would have promised that these ex-CARICOM workers would have been entitled to their leases, a promise that was made and a promise that was kept. And this is not just one tranche. This is actually the third distribution we have done so far since in office. Just 9 months in office, we're able to keep that promise to those ex-CARICOM workers, a promise made by the Honorable Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessop Senior Counsel. That's one issue. The second issue is this. There was a particular matter that touched and concerned private sugarcane farmers and compensation. In December 2014, the then cabinet would have agreed to a compensation package in the sum of $130 million for former private sugarcane farmers as a final settlement to the 2007 transition payment out of the sugar industry. And the monies, according to the cabinet decision, were to be made in 3 tranches. As a first tranche, the sum of $27 million that was available under the European Union accompanying measures of Sugar Protocol Program. The second tranche would have been made based on an allocation given to us by the European Union. The second tranche in the sum of $75 million. And the third tranche in the sum of $28 million. Now, that particular matter would have been dealt with in court. 2,323 cane farmers would have filed a claim against the former PNM administration after the former Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, would have indicated that he would have received some advice or so on, and that those payments were not to be made. However, history will show that from the first tranche of payments, as I outlined earlier on, while the People's Partnership was still in office, the first tranche of compensation was paid to the former sugarcane farmers in July 2015. That's the first tranche that was paid. So therefore, two tranches were outstanding. That was the $75 million and the $28 million tranche that has to be paid. However, these farmers took the matter to court in order to enforce this promise made to them by the government. The then administration would have retained senior counsel Fayad Hosein and junior counsel Vanessa Gopal to advance a defense on behalf of the state that the promise made by the government was unenforceable and without consideration. Now, the European Union would have given the government of Trinidad and Tobago €8 million in order to make this compensation payment to these former cane farmers. That money should have been placed in something called a suspense account, which means that the money would be holding there until the payments were ready to be made to the private sugarcane farmers. That money was instead appropriated or taken, instead of putting it into the suspense account, and placed into the consolidated fund, which meant that that money for the former cane farmers didn't go to them, but it went into the consolidated fund to pay what? Rental. To pay $1 million briefs to their favored attorneys. To pay for all the corruption and scandal we saw for the last 10 years. So instead of giving the farmers what was due to them, the former government took that money and spent it elsewhere. That is in fact unlawful. That is in fact unethical. And that deserves condemnation. However, this claim that was brought on behalf of the farmers by the then opposition leader, now Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, together with Mr. Gerald Ramdeen. The good news in all of this is that when the claim came up for hearing, after successful negotiations, the claim was in fact settled, and the cane farmers would in fact get what is due to them. There was negotiations, and based on the negotiations, there was in fact a savings to the government. So today we congratulate Mr. Ramdeen and Mr. Diade Haripol on behalf of those farmers and so on. But what is strange in all of this is this. I am told that some of the farmers, while the court matter was going on, during the pendency of the court matter, if these farmers wanted to get paid, they were asked to sign a particular document. And today I received that document from the Ministry of Planning. This is the document in hand. This is a draft I got. The former administration, what they were doing, were coercing the farmers into saying this. If you want your payment for tranche 2 and tranche 3, we're going to pay that money now, but you are only going to get 53% of what you're entitled to. That's the first point. And the second point is, the letter has this, and they are asked to sign this. And I'm quoting from the document. Please note that Mr. Gerald Ramdeen does not represent me and or us. So what they were trying to do is force these farmers to go behind the backs of the represented attorneys, coerce them into signing an agreement, collecting 53% of what they're entitled to, and say that Mr. Ramdeen does not represent us. That was a condition. This was his spite. This was his spite that the former government showed these ex-Caroni workers. But I'm not surprised, because I have an Express article here written by Rhea Tate, dated the 12th of April 2016, where the former Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, when speaking of this matter, said, for the cane farmers, not one more cent for them. Not one more cent. Not one more cent. But we have seen every single time that the PNM is in power, they fight against what people are entitled to. The same thing with the current land leases. A claim was filed. Former retired High Court Judge Justice Lennox Dialsing in 2007 had ruled that the government has to provide these ex-colony workers with their lands. You know what happened? The former PNM administration at that time appealed the matter. On what ground? Saying that Justice Dialsing was biased. Why? Because he writes some article in a newspaper. It took the UNC government in 2010 to withdraw that appeal. That is why today I could have stood proudly and give 250 ex-colony workers their land leases. And we could have done it in the other two other distributions. So those are the matters I wish to raise with respect to the ex-colony workers and the private sugarcane farmers. I want to move on to another area, which is some exceedingly good news also. The government is pleased to announce the project involving the UE Debe campus. As you would remember, that this construction was officially launched in around 2011 by the then Ministry of Science, Technology and Tertiary Education. Construction began in 2013, and that was for the signature building of the UE, the academic building for other UE programs, halls of residence, student union building, recreational facilities, and other amenities. That campus was almost, in fact, completed. In fact, the former government would have used the halls of residence, if you would remember, as a step-down facility during the COVID-19 pandemic. You would have known the history of the particular matter that happened, where the former administration, due to lack of funding to the UWI, would have resulted in the campus suffering severe or significant deterioration, which left it in a state of absolute disarray and disrepair. And there was limited or no maintenance in particular facilities at that particular site. However, last year, the new administration, the new UNC government, was able to ensure that a facilities condition assessment was done of the UE South Debe Penal campus to indicate to the cabinet and the government as a whole what exactly had to be done in order to bring the campus back up to a level of being functional. And I have a copy of the facilities condition assessment report in my hand. That was done by Aquitas, that those were the consultants used on the particular project. I'm happy to announce that based on the facilities condition assessment report, several monies were appropriated in the budget of last year, which is the 2026 fiscal. And I am happy to report that in December 2025, the Ministry of Tertiary Education and Skills Training engaged the PSAEL, the Palo Seco Agriculture Enterprise Limited, to conduct the required works on the South Campus. So a memorandum of agreement was in fact entered between MTES and PSAEL on Thursday, 15th January 2026 to develop and implement the works associated with the project. On Monday, 19th January 2026, a kickoff meeting was held with MTES, PSAEL, and the key stakeholders such as the UE to discuss the steps forward in ensuring that the UE South Campus becomes operationalized in an expedient manner. The site visit of the campus was conducted yesterday, Tuesday, 20th January, led by the CEO of PSAEL together with members of MTES and UE. We anticipate the tendering process for these particular packages to go out very soon, and we are fully committed to ensuring the reopening of the UE South Campus by the start of the academic new year. This was a promise made to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and a promise that will in fact be kept. So those are the good news when it comes to the UE Debe campus. And with good news, you also might have some bad one. Um, you would have seen last December, in the last week of December, the Chaguaramas Development Authority was in fact reassigned to the Ministry of Land and Legal Affairs. So the Ministry of Land and Legal Affairs now has responsibility for the Chaguaramas Development Authority. And after meeting with the board of the new authority that was recently installed and the chairman of that board, I am told, and I am to report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago of some of the preliminary findings that were made. One, there's a failure by the former CDA to ensure procurement rules and regulatory filings were adhered to. The OPR informed the CDA that the CDA has been non-compliant in its contract reporting since the inception of the Act. The OPR indicated that the CDA has not submitted the readiness assessment checklist for the year 2024 to 25, no annual schedule of planned procurement activities for 24-25, no disposal reporting for 24-25, and no quarterly contract reporting for 24-25. No Freedom of Information reports were filed since 2023. The failure to properly manage finances to ensure accountability and transparency in the use of state funds. And this one was exceedingly alarming when I got my briefing as minister. There were no audited, and I want you all to pay very close attention to this. There were no audited statements since financial year ending September 30th, 2017. 2017. No audited statements since financial year ending September 30, 2017. We are now in what? 2026. Existing accounts not IFRS compliant. The CDA is operating without management accounts or any form of financial statements for the period ending 30 September 2024 and 30 September 2025. There's an absence of a fixed asset register. There's an absence of written procurement policy and guide for contracts less than $1 million. The CDA had accounts receivable of $83.2 million in the period ending 30th September 2023, which was inflated to $95.1 million for the period ending 30th September 2024. And this is as a result, as you will know, that a majority of the revenue of the CDA comes from the rentals and the leasing of the various lands and facilities at the CDA. The new board has informed me that they have taken note of these matters and they are going to very soon in the future address these matters. The other issue is with respect to the monitoring of breaches and encroachments by various tenants. Now, I was also alarmed to learn of what happened with employment at the CDA also. A document purporting to be a contract, which is in fact a contract, that was signed on the 3rd of July 2024, retained one called Karen Clark Rowley as the general manager for a period of 3 years with effect from the 3rd of July 2024 at the CDA. Now, Karen Clark Rowley, according to this document, is probably the beneficiary of a Victoria Keys HEC apartment. I'm seeing that on the document here. The remuneration package of Mrs. Clark Rowley is $44,000 per month, a traveling allowance of $5,000 per month, an entertainment allowance of $1,500 per month, a cell phone allowance of $500 per month. She's entitled to a bonus based on performance and gratuity of 20% at the end of service. And these are the terms of the contract. And in fact, Mrs. Rowley, based on a document here, dated the 7th of March 2025, indicated that she attained the retirement age of 60 on the 8th of November 2024, but due to her contract of employment, her new retirement date would be at a later date. So The reason why I raise this concern is we are looking at what happened at the CDA that I just outlined while Mrs. Clark Rowley was in charge of that particular authority. I'm told, it could be denied or admitted, but I'm told that she's the sister of Mrs. Sharon Clark Rowley, or the sister-in-law of the former Prime Minister, who has received this very good remuneration package. But what is seriously concerning is how they were disposing of lands and leases at the CDA. Because the reports revealed to me here is that there was a particular property right after the general election, in fact, very, very close to the general election. A decision was made on the 7th of April 2025 for drafting of leases for review. And it said that the committee recommended the approval of the draft deed of lease for DDI Property Limited, as well as both a draft renewal deed of lease for another company. So I want to focus on DDI Limited. On checks from the company's registry, DDI property belongs to 1. Michael Allen Andrew Kwamina, attorney at law. I think that was the personal attorney or friend of the former Prime Minister. And in fact, he was granted a lease for a parcel of land measuring approximately 22,000 square feet. And this property is located on Monos Island, also called Turtle Bay. And what is surprising to me is, and there were valuation reports and so on, but he is getting this rent for a term of 30 years at the price of $2,200 per month. At 22,000 square feet property, at $2,200 per month down the islands. That is what we have discovered at the CDA. And as the days go by, more and more of these things are coming out of what took place under the last former administration. The good news in CDA is this, is that there's a developmental plan being considered and deliberated upon by the board of the CDA. More will be said on this because it requires parliamentary intervention and so on. But we want to ensure that the CDA is transformed into a proper business model. It has some of the most prime real estate in the Caribbean, I dare say, at the CDA. Those lands are valuable lands. The facilities are exceedingly valuable. And once the right investment is made, we can see Chagaramas being one of the major growth poles in Trinidad and Tobago. So these are the few matters, the good news and the bad news, I wish to leave you all with this afternoon. So thank you all very much, members of the media.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hosein. We'd now like to open the floor for questions from the media. So, we invite some first.
Hi, good afternoon. Alicia Boucher from TV6. My first two questions are actually for Minister Sobers. Minister, you mentioned the delegation from the UAE coming to Trinidad and Tobago, and you did mention, where they are positioned in the oil and gas industry globally. So I was wondering, given the government's stated intention prior to the general election and onward, to have Petrotrin reopened, would Petrotrin actually be one of the sites in which the delegation will be visiting?
No, on this trip, Petrotrin will not be one of the sites that the delegation would be visiting. They would be down at the Point Lisas Industrial Estate and some of the other sites that I mentioned. It does not mean that we are not having some degree of discussion with them and others as it relates to Petrotrin. But because energy matters are very sensitive and negotiations also are extremely sensitive, and that falls within the remit of the Ministry of Energy, I would not want to comment any further on that matter.
Okay, and would you be able to say whether there is any cost at all attached to the state for this particular visit of the delegation, and if so, what that cost is?
Yes, there's a cost attached to the state for the delegation being here. I can't indicate the exact figure at this point in time. What I would say is that is a very normal situation. When we travel to certain countries, it is customary in terms of protocol, especially with respect to high-level delegations that the ministry, different ministries, usually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other ministries would come together to absorb certain costs associated with the delegation being present there. And that is something that we are doing here, which is a global norm in terms of this type of protocol.
Yes, Minister, I know. But would you be able to give a ballpark figure, even though you can't give like an actual
Well,
amount?
I think that would be irresponsible of me to do. So that subsequent to the visit, if you do pose that question and I'm seized and possessed of the information at that juncture, I'd be more than happy to provide you the information.
Thank you, Minister.
Of course.
All right. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Doris.
Doris Polo, Guardian Media. Minister Sobers, I would have had a few questions that I sent you a while back and I didn't get a response. I'm going to post them again. Can you explain to us and give us an update? It's been a few weeks since the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. What's the status of our relationship with Venezuela? Have you spoken with the ambassador since?
Our diplomatic relations with the people of Venezuela remain intact. We are following certain protocols as it pertains to moving further in terms of those relations. And at this stage, because of how sensitive those protocols are, I won't be able to comment on those discussions.
Does the government recognize Delcy Rodriguez as the interim president of Venezuela now that she has been sworn in?
The government recognizes the fact that there has been some degree of change in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. What the government also recognizes is that there has been conversations with respect to a smooth democratic transitionary process, and we await for that to play itself out.
So when you say some degree of change, does that equate to recognizing her role as interim president of Venezuela?
I think I answered the question.
I'm not clear.
Beg your pardon?
I am not clear. You said you recognized there's been some degree of change. What does that mean?
I do apologize if you are not pellucid on what I just intonated, but that is the position of the government.
That we recognize some change.
Degree of change, and we welcome the position that is being articulated, that there will be some democratic transition. We hope for it, for the people of Venezuela, that it is smooth and that it doesn't involve any hiccups whatsoever.
Any official updates when national security is concerned that our government is monitoring? Because the last conference that you were at when we were both here.
Yes.
We spoke about people's concerns, and things have been quite calm, and I'm sure every citizen would be very happy for that. But any new developments that the country and our security services are monitoring, or are things as calm as it appears to be?
I'm glad that you said that. Things are calm as they appear to be, because they are in fact calm. And luckily for us, we have a Prime Minister whose first name is Kamala, and she always says to remain calm. The National Security Council, headed by the Honorable Prime Minister, we are always monitoring varying different scenarios. But as it pertains to anything tethered to Venezuela, you are correct. There's nothing to be concerned about. The public is to remain calm about that situation.
The United States has asked a few Caribbean countries to accept third-party deportees that are not origins of their territories. Has Trinidad and Tobago been approached to accept any such persons, and what is our position?
No such request of that nature has been put to Trinidad and Tobago. And so the question essentially, thereafter it does not arise.
There was a police officer that was arrested in relation to drug trafficking and taken to the United States. Could you just give us the basis for that and give us any update at all on what happened?
Well, I won't be able to provide you with any information on that. I think it would be better if that question is posed to the police commissioner and maybe the Attorney General's office as they deal with extradition and whatnot.
What can you tell us about the open arrangement that we would have had to accommodate U.S. military aircraft in our territory? Has there been any change? Has it discontinued, or is it still open? And what is the traffic situation like in terms of how often they are coming here?
Right. The thing is, there's never been an open accommodation process for any aircraft to Trinidad and Tobago. There's a process that involves the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it involves members of the Special Branch, it involves the Ministry of Homeland Security. That process remains in place and intact. In terms of how frequent varying countries access or are engaged in that process, it varies obviously from time to time based upon the request.
There was supposed to be a migrant registration process for all migrants, and there were some concerns from the Venezuelan community, people who were seeking to have their status regularized, that it may have been postponed to an indefinite date. Can you give us an update on that?
That matter is currently before the Cabinet, and a decision on that issue in terms of how the rollout is going to be would be announced quite soon.
Someone has a question?
Yeah. No.
No question.
All right, so this is for Minister Hosein. I wanted to find out, you mentioned, I forgot the exact time frame in terms of the CDA's accounts receivables being something in the vicinity of 83.2 million inflated to $95 million. I was wondering, based on the checks and so on that you've done now, what is the balance? I know you said no audit was done since 2017, but what is the balance of that account now?
The actual CDA account,
That is correct.
those are matters that we are still trying to reconcile. The board has in fact instituted an audit committee, a subcommittee of the board. As soon as that report is sent to me, I will be very happy to share the findings of that with you.
And you also mentioned the property down Monos Island, I believe.
Down the islands.
Yes, down the islands, right? $2,200 per month for 22,000 square feet. Seeing that the CDA is now under your remit, what do you plan to do about matters such as that, as those?
So the CDA has in fact engaged in an exercise where they have conducted an audit of all of the leases, and it has been categorized in terms of those who are compliant, those who are non-compliant, those who, if you look at the lease arrangements, there's a rent review clause, those who are up for rent review. And there are special circumstances like these also that we're paying close attention to in terms of getting further legal advice and so on. So in fact, there's a complete overhaul of what is taking place right now. and the board will in fact report on those particular matters and how the negotiations will happen with the particular tenants at the CDA.
And as it pertains to the Caroni cane farmers, you would have mentioned some, based on negotiations and so on, that there were savings to the state. I just want clarity. This would be under your administration or under the former administration?
No, so basically, when I outlined that there was a particular global sum for the settlement of all of the claims broken down into 3 tranches, there were 2 tranches that were outstanding. The farmers, based on their legal rights and so on, had certain entitlements. There was negotiations between the farmers and the state, and that redound to some savings in terms of the negotiation going forward, so that these farmers can in fact get what is due to them.
Okay, and
but it does not affect their entitlement of what they were entitled to.
So the balance of farmers to be paid, would you be able to say how many? And
those numbers will be with the Ministry of Planning, but I can always provide that to you at a later date.
Okay, thank you.
But those claims have in fact been settled.
Oh, final question. You would have mentioned, and this slipped me, you would have mentioned a proclamation of a law by the president. You would have held that up. What is that
the Home
exactly?
Invasion Bill.
Okay.
The Home Invasion Standing Ground legislation.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I've been Sir good day. Jesse Joseph, Penpoint Solutions Limited. I just have one question. Youth and agriculture and tech integration. How is the ministry integrating technology innovation and youth participation into modern agriculture, all right, to make the sector more profitable and attractive?
So recently you would have seen that the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries would have outlined a particular training program that would take place across Trinidad and Tobago with various modules from technology, from traditional farming, from livestock production, from livestock management and so on. And those particular programs will be rolled out throughout all of Trinidad and Tobago over the next 8 or 9 months. That program would be rolled out, and that came to Cabinet recently and the Minister made the announcement.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ayana Carter from TTT. Mr. Hosein, I'm not sure if you gave this answer already, but I just wanted to find out what time frame are we working with in order to pay the other 2 tranches for the private sugarcane farmers?
So I would have outlined earlier on that the government had the money.
Mm-hmm.
The last government spent all the money that would have been allocated for the farmers. The budgeting exercise would have been completed for fiscal 2026 without this matter being completed. However, there's a mid-year review, and I'm sure that those matters would be addressed in the mid-year review going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Minister Sobers, please. Minister Sobers, what are the hopes of the government? What do you hope to achieve with the visit of the UAE representatives? What are the deliverables that you're looking for?
Right. So, I mean, I outlined some of them in my earlier presentation. Essentially, the discussions between Trinidad and Tobago and the Gulf nations, the UAE being one of them, is really for economic development and investment into Trinidad and Tobago, but also to broaden our existing relationship with partners outside of the region. We value our relationship with members of the Caribbean community, but as we grew as a society and as things change, we need to look beyond the 14 or 15 million people that live within the Caribbean region. We consider our partners that exist within Southern and Central America as well too. And based upon our Prime Minister's visionary leadership, we've now extended that arm then to persons now within the Middle East, which was really never explored before by Trinidad and Tobago. So it's really about economic development and investment, but also building that relationship that did not exist within that side of the world, and exploring other ventures. So we will have announcements coming up from the Minister of Public Administration and Artificial Intelligence with a lot of the work that he has been doing with the United Arab Emirates. And there are also ongoing discussions with ministers and their counterparts in the Kingdom of Bahrain, for example. So there are several ongoing discussions and initiatives that we intend to concretize and complete, hopefully not in the far distant future, but it is based upon our Prime Minister's clarion call to explore the world that exists outside of the Caribbean region.
And my last question for now. Recently, we would have seen Minister Jolene John visiting parts of China. I'm not sure if you're able to give an update on what was discussed, that kind of thing.
I would prefer Minister John to expand on that. All I would say is that she had a fantastic engagement with a lot of persons that she met on that trip in China. And I think part of the trip also focused on some engagements in the United Kingdom. And I am certain that at the most apt stage, Minister John will give an update on those things to the public.
Minister Sobers, I wanted to go back to the last question I asked, where you said that the migrant process was before cabinet. But just for clarity, could you explain why the process that was initially intended to take place on a specific day did not happen on that day? Or what happened?
Okay. Minister Hosein will expand on that.
So there is, as part of the response to that question, is that you would have known that these matters require legislative intervention. And as a cabinet, we have to be very careful when we deal with these particular matters. The note did in fact come before the cabinet. I can't go into the details of it. As you know, cabinet deliberations are in fact confidential. But those matters will of course be made public, because we have to ensure that the communication is done in such a way that everyone understands what we're doing. So we have to be very deliberate and careful with these particular matters.
I have another question for Minister Sobers, but since you're here, I want to ask you, as an attorney, some legal minds are taking umbrage to some comments made by the Prime Minister as it pertains to the Law Association, where she called them greedy eater food attorneys. What are your thoughts as an attorney yourself? I recently spoke to one Ms. Hazel Thompson, IE, who considered the Prime Minister ungrateful. Her words was ingratitude, because attorneys would have selflessly, with no fees attached, assisted the Prime Minister in certain matters in the past, participated in committees, and they felt offended. She, as an attorney, you are one as well. What's your thoughts?
When the Prime Minister made that comment, we have to juxtapose it with how many state briefs that they got. In the last 10 years, $1 billion worth of state fees were given by PNM greedy eater food lawyers. In fact, we're now seeing is not only briefs that they got, but it might be land in terms of the amount of monies that they have received. So while the Prime Minister made that statement, juxtaposed a statement according to what was given in terms of state briefs and preference to the PNM eater food lawyers. So I fully stand in support of the Prime Minister's statement.
So that was not a comment necessarily meant for the Law Association, but for PNM attorneys that may be members.
All of the greedy eater food lawyers who were receiving hefty state briefs.
But why was the comment directed to the Law Association then, and not it specifically mentioned and directed to PNM attorneys?
Reflect on the membership of the Law Association. And you'll see whether or not some of them there would have received some of those big briefs. And look at the advisors to the Council of the Law Association.
I want to turn my attention back to Minister Sobers, because the CARICOM meeting that is supposed to happen in February, we've been asking, and curious minds would like to know, is the delegation finalized? Is the Prime Minister going to be attending?
There are several matters, and I have commented on it when questions were put to me by members of the media within recent weeks. There are several matters engaging CARICOM's attention concerning or tethered to the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting carded for the end of February in St. Kitts and Nevis that have not been settled yet. And so based upon that, Cabinet cannot take a decision on the delegation that will be attending until those matters are settled. I am hopeful that during the course of this week, those things can be ironed out and cabinet will make a decision within the next 2 weeks, possibly, as it pertains to the delegation. But that has nothing to do with Trinidad and Tobago specifically. There are just certain issues that have to be ironed out with respect to the upcoming meeting, and CARICOM, as far as I'm concerned, they're trying their best to have that sorted out.
Minister Hosein, between 2010 and 2015, $1 billion in state briefs to UNC attorneys. Do you think that the message is clear? We know there are a lot of names that usually come up, like for instance, Mr. Anand Ram Logan, Gerald Ramdeen, several names that would have come up and would have been individuals recipients of state briefs. Again, do you think that this statement was fair? And do you think that it is, what would you say to people who consider this sentiment hypocritical?
What about Michael Kwamina, Douglas Mendez, Fayed Hussein? Just to name a few. Why are you not calling those names? Because we have to balance what is being said. At the end of the day, when you look at what took place at the Attorney General's office under the PNM administration, in fact, after all that $1 billion was spent, you could count how much cases they probably won on one hand. Whether or not it was value for money also. That's a serious issue. And what the former Attorney General Al-Rawi tried to do was he consolidated all of the legal fees from the AG office, from all of the state enterprises and all of the ministries for the 5-year period, and that is where he got his figure of $1 billion. When we looked at the figures, there was $1 billion coming out alone from the Office of the Attorney General under the PNM administration.
I don't want to do the tit for tat, but what I'm asking is, would it not be considered hypocritical when we can name names along both sides of the political fence to have them be referred to as eater food lawyers because they are PNM, but then we have Varun Debadeen, Gerald Ramdeen, as I mentioned before, and Ram Logan and others that we could reference who were also recipients of state briefs. So the question becomes, because it's a bigger issue here, the concern being that the Prime Minister or the government is taking a sort of hardline approach against independent institutions. In this instance, the Law Association reference could be made to the Energy Chamber. Reference could also be made towards independent senators. So is it, in your view, when people look at what's happening, every successive government takes over and they point out, this is the laundry list of legal fees that attorneys that were akin to one party or the other receive. Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's hypocritical? Do you think you're engaging in a tit for tat that is not necessarily reflective of what you guys stand for?
I call it courage. This is the first time we have had a Prime Minister who was so courageous to call out all of these white elephants in the room. We stand fully behind the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was very clear and articulate in her position and very strong. She outlined all of the reasons for her statement that she gave. And at the end of the day, the Prime Minister stands in a very brave position, a very courageous position to call out all of these institutions that persons may have been afraid to do. So yes, we fully stand behind and support that particular position taken by the Prime Minister.
What about
Minister Morris is wrestling me for the microphone.
No, what about independent senators? Because I spoke with two of them yesterday, Dr. Maria Dillon Remy, Hazel Thompson, and in fact, Dr. Dillon Remy pointed out an instance where she was the sole independent senator to abstain from a vote as it pertains to the Dangerous Drug Amendments Act at the time to decriminalize marijuana. She was the sole independent senator to abstain. And on the flip side, when it came to the legislation to increase the seats from 12 to 15 for Tobago, for the Tobago House of Assembly, there was only one independent senator that voted in line with the government, which was Paul Richards. They find the criticism of the independent bench unfair. They also find the suggestion that those appointed by President Christine Kangaloo are incapable of being independent when Senate President Wade Mark, when he's acting as president and he appoints somebody, there's not a similar position taken or view that these people can't be independent. What do you take to people? Because this is a sacrifice, a tremendous one. We require independent senators to form parts of the checks and balance in our legislature. What are your thoughts? Because it may dissuade some people.
Can you find in the Constitution where you define an independent senator? In the Constitution, there are 3 senators: government senators, opposition senators, and 9 senators appointed by the president. We have a sitting president, and I am not going into the individual. She sat as a PNM minister in a PNM cabinet. She fought a seat under a PNM banner. She went on a political platform and said that we must spread the gospel of the PNM. And we are to believe, I'm not casting any aspersion on anybody, but when you look at matters of apparent bias, if it looks like it, then it is. So, while I'm not casting any aspersion, look at the person that sits in the seat of the president, and that's the answer I want to give. I'm standing behind the statement of the Honorable Prime Minister.
I know Dr. May, who was once an independent senator. Nicholas, could I just finish my final question? Could I be allowed?
Well, this is a final question.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wanna find out. Is the government going to then consider making room for these senators that are presidential appointees to then become true independents? Perhaps a committee that looks at it rather than the president. Are you guys looking at any change to the amendment to the Constitution to facilitate that, so that persons are not going to be considered partisan appointees and are viewed as truly independent?
Those are matters that are not within my portfolio. Constitutional reform, that I believe that is what you're speaking of. Those are matters I will direct you to the Honorable Prime Minister, and she can give you a position on that.
Thank you.
Alicia. Does it? You have a question?
Last question. You got your last question, I think. The race is on fire. No pun intended.
Okay, Minister Hosein, we would have heard several concerns continue to be raised about the Zones of Special Operations bill that is presently being debated in the Senate. Yesterday, the Movement for Social Justice would have pointed out the similarities in this particular legislation to a state of emergency. So when the country is in a state of emergency, what will apply for these specific communities and so on. And he would have raised concerns that the requirements under which this is operating are a lot less from the requirements for a state of emergency. How do you respond to that and those concerns that there was not adequate consultation which people felt should have been had for something which infringes or is said to infringe upon the constitutional rights of citizens in the country?
I think the MSJ concerns are misplaced. When you look at the reading of the law, first, the Prime Minister sits in council, which means the National Security Council. There are 2 conditions on which, firstly, an area could be designated as a zone. That has to be met based on the advice being tendered by the CDS, the Commissioner of Police. Thereafter, a statement has to be made in Parliament by a particular period. And thereafter, if there's an extension, it must have the affirmative resolution of the Parliament. Unlike a state of emergency, all happens is that when the president issues a proclamation, a debate takes place to just note the statement of the president, and thereafter, then only a debate in the House for the extension. So therefore, you have that added protection. Under a state of emergency, there is no right of habeas corpus, and there is something called preventative detention orders, for which are adjudicated upon by the tribunal. In this case, you still have your right to habeas corpus, you have a right to bail, you have the immediate right to access a judicial officer, be it a magistrate, and then if bail is denied, you have the right to go to a judge in chambers. So there are several checks, balances, and constitutional safeguards. Simply because when you look at the drafting of the bill, it acknowledges that there may be some infringement with sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, which is allowed, but at the same time, the bill is weighed proportionally in terms of its legislative measures to protect the citizenry with the safeguarding of certain rights and freedoms. It's not that you declare a zone and everybody gets locked up. That's not what the law is intended to do. The law is intended very clearly that where a zone is declared as a particular area, there's an option that the area will be cordoned off and you can have curfews imposed on that areas. I have spoken to people and they are actually asking that if particular areas that they live in can be declared zones, because it will also provide a level of safety and security for those victims of home invasion and so on, because they know that if there's a strange vehicle outside their house after curfew hour, you know what's happening. Police can come for them and so on, law enforcement. So the bill is in fact balanced in terms of protection of human rights, but at the same time meeting its legislative aim.
The MSJ would have suggested that the decision to do things like cordon off certain areas, that those decisions should not be made by non-civilians, i.e. the CDS, the police commissioner, suggesting that it should be a decision perhaps made by the Prime Minister.
Sure.
Your response to that?
If the MSJ reads the entire bill, they will understand, because I don't know their capacity, so I don't want to comment on that. But if they read the entire bill, they will see at the end of the bill, there is the provision of the community committee, which will have a multi-sector approach. So while there's a hard approach, there's also the soft approach. So you have up to the Member of Parliament, you have civil society, you have the LSA, you have Ministry of Social Development. So you have a cadre of civilians that sit on that committee that has to produce, I think, monthly reports based on the activities that are happening in these various zones. So while you take a hard approach against the criminals, at the end of the day, we want to look at the root causes of what may cause certain behavioral patterns, and that is why you have a multi-sectoral committee being established with respect to this. So there is a balanced approach in the piece of legislation. I think our time is up. I have another meeting to go to, and Mr. Morris, I invite you.
Thank you very much, Minister Hosein and Minister Sobers. So members of the media, members of the public, we thank you for joining us at our weekly press conference. Today we had a lot to present to you. We thank Minister Hosein, who just gave out a number of leases earlier on. We thank you for the information on CDA, as well as the government's step to protect the welfare of our country. And again, we congratulate Minister Sobers, led by the Prime Minister, who will be welcoming yet another global leader to our country as we are open for business and open to build on the ambitions and talent of our people. So thank you very much. We are the first government that continues to account to you on a weekly basis. So thank you very much.